It's Coastal Gardener on the Talk Station FM 107.1, and joining us today, Sean Banks of the Carteret Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency, part of the NC State, also Department of Agriculture, I might add. And Sean, we're coming into now fall, looks like it, but then we have these moments of warm weather, and I'm wondering, are we confusing the plants by any chance?
No, I don't think the plants are going to get confused. I think the plants will understand what's going on pretty well. We usually have these times. It doesn't usually happen until February, but we usually have some warm periods in the middle of our winter time anyway.
Well, it's just one more thing I wondered about because earlier we talked about bringing the plants in-house for those plants, those potted plants that might not sustain the winter very well. All right, so what can we do at this time of year? And I of course, jump right in with a bunch of questions, but with this warm weather, is there something we can do that take advantage of lawns or our gardens or perennials, things of this nature?
Well, one of the things that I think is really important to do is to make sure that as the leaves are falling off the tree, I'm seeing a lot of the leaves fall, don't let them pile up. Despite the fact that the grass is going dormant, the grass is still a little bit green, and if you leave those leaves on the grass, then it could either suffocate it or kill it because it's being shaded out. So one of the best things to do is to go ahead and remove those leaves. A couple of things that you can do.
But let me pause you right there. Those leaves are good mulch, are they not?
Yes, they are. They're great mulch.
Oh, okay, but you're not mulching a yard. You're mulching your plants. Okay.
You don't want to mulch the grass,
right?
but if you do want to use those leaves as a mulch in the grass to prevent winter weed seed from germinating or those early spring weed seed from germinating, you can use a mulching mower, cut those leaves up into really tiny pieces, and then just let them fall down in between the blades of the grass, and they do create a mulch in the grass itself, and that helps to, number one, return organic matter into the soil,
right.
And as it does that, it helps to feed the grass, but it also, like I mentioned, it will shade out those weed seed, prevent them from germinating, and also keep what little moisture that's in the ground. Plus, you're getting rid of those leaves so they're not suffocating the grass.
Okay. You were going to go through a list of items. I have another item associated with leaves, but I'll leave that for your. I apologize. What to do with these fallen leaves?
Well, the other thing I was going to mention is that if you do want to remove them from the grass, go ahead and blow them into a pile, and then I like to use a blower vac, which chops them into smaller pieces,
right.
And then use them as a mulch in some of my flower beds and shrub beds, and that helps to return some of those nutrients back to the soil, but it also, again, is going to prevent the weed seed from being able to germinate and grow because they're not getting the sunlight that they need. So those are two things that you can do: mulch them into the grass, or mulch them and put them onto the flower beds and tree and shrub areas, and use them as a mulch in there.
Okay, now we have a lot of pine trees here in the coastal North Carolina. And my question is kind of a twofold question. The benefits of longleaf rather than the southern pine. But before I get to that one, I'm curious. You see a lot of pine leaves on the grass.
Right.
And I think it alters the acidity, the acidic nature of the ground, if am I
That's
correct on that?
correct.
So if you have a lot of pine straw on the ground, do you still want to rake it up, or can you just leave that and it will naturally enhance the grass? Because it is interesting. Pine straw seems to be a very good, at least from my observations, a good foundation for a green lawn.
Well, I can answer that question by saying it really just depends. Number one, if you've taken a soil sample and your soil test has come back and your pH is a little bit high, so say it's around 6.9, 7.0, somewhere around there, and you're trying to grow like St. Augustine Bermuda grass or zoysia grass that likes to have a pH between 6.8 and 6.2, somewhere around in there, then adding those pine needles in there, you can mow them over with a lawnmower. That breaks them up and gets them down into the soil a little bit quicker, so they're not just sitting right there on top and everybody sees them. but they will acidify the soil just a little bit. They're not going to do it really, really quick.
Right.
But if your pH is just a little high, then adding those pine needles into the soil to acidify it will help, but it also returns some of those nutrients back into the soil. However, if you live in an area where the pH is a little bit low, leaving those pine needles on there is still going to lower the pH just a little bit. So that's going to mean you're going to need to add a little bit of lime to bring the pH up to where it needs to be. So depending on what kind of grass you're growing or what your pH of your soil is, well, generally depending on the plant you're growing and the pH of the soil, because the same goes for trees and shrubs. Some like to have more acidic soil, like azaleas and camellias.
Right.
Whereas a lot of them like to have a pH in the mid-6 range. But if your pH is up in the 7s, adding those pine needles is going to eventually lower that down and break them down a little bit.
Okay. By the way, are there certain grasses that benefit from pine, basically pine straw?
I don't know of any grasses that benefit from it. I don't know any that they hurt.
Okay.
So whether it's pine straw or regular leaves, they're both going to acidify the soil just a little bit.
All right. The other question I said had to do with longleaf versus southern pine. Is there a difference in the pine needles by any chance?
The longleaf pine needles are going to be a little bit better. They're going to take a little bit longer to break down because they're longer, so they have less surface area to begin with. But if you put them through the mower, you're going to break them down into smaller pieces, which increases the surface area and allows them to break down quicker. Longleaf generally tend to look a little bit better and hold on to their color a little bit longer. But what's 2 or 3 weeks? I can't really tell the difference.
Okay.
But longleaf generally is the one that most people are going to use when they're using a pine needle for a mulch.
Right.
My opinion, if you're using it for a mulch, it's going to work either way, whether it's the loblolly pine that's very prominent in our area or whether it's the longleaf pine.
Okay. All right. You mentioned the soil, the acidity, acidification. What's the word?
The acidity.
The acidity. Thank you very much. Of the soil. You can still get your soil samples done for free, but only for a few more weeks.
Right. You have to get those soil samples up to the soil test lab before Thanksgiving. So if you put it in the mail and it doesn't make it there before Thanksgiving, even if you put it in the mail, what you think would be plenty of time to get there, if it doesn't get there until the day after Thanksgiving, they're going to charge you for each box.
Okay. So I just want to make mention of that. That's one of the joys of working with the Cooperative Extension Agency and North Carolina. They're trying to help you with your yards, your gardens, and your ornamentals as well. Okay, I jumped right into a question associated with the season and the temperature changes and things of this nature. Anything happening in the world of yard care or gardens or shrubbery that we need to think about?
Well, the one thing that excuse me, I'm getting a lot of questions on is plants that tend to get leaf spot. The leaf spot, because of the warmer temperatures, is able to work a little bit longer into the fall, because it's going to work anytime the temperatures are up. So the fungus is going to go dormant when it's too cold, but when it warms back up like it has, they're going to start working again. Okay,
my next question associated that, I'm going to jump right into it with another question, of course, is now that, I think I may have leaf spot. It is very warm out there. We've got temperatures in the 70s, low 70s.
Right.
Should I do something? Should I, with a herbicide or something of this nature?
Well, if you wanted to spray something, I wouldn't spray a herbicide because that's probably going to kill your plant.
Yeah.
But that would take care of the leaf spot problem because you would have a plant to work with.
Exactly. I'm sorry. Yeah. But a
fungicide.
Fungicide. Thank you.
If you wanted to control a leaf spot, a fungicide would work.
Actually, I like the herbicide. That eliminates the whole thing.
No more problem.
Okay. Fungicide. Yeah.
But a fungicide, they're going to slow the spread of the fungal pathogen down. It's not going to actually kill the fungus. It just slows that down.
Okay.
But if we're not receiving any rain, there's really no point. And I haven't seen a whole lot of rain. I know we're expecting some, hopefully, in the next couple of days. But it's not a guarantee, as with any weather event. But most fungal leaf spots spread by splashing water. So if you have irrigation that's overhead irrigation, anytime you're irrigating with overhead irrigation and you've got a fungal leaf spot, there is a chance that you're spreading that spot from leaf to leaf.
Okay. All right. Related to that, you mentioned irrigation. Again, we haven't had a lot of rain here recently. We're looking at warm, sunny temperatures. And I put sun into that comment because it is evaporative.
Right.
My question, should we, at moments like this, go out and do a little additional irrigation of our lawns or our shrubs?
I still go out and water my plants that are in containers that I have outside.
Okay.
Mostly because they're going to dry out regardless. I have to water them less when they're going dormant, so I don't need to water them as often right now as I would during the heat of the summer, but they still need to have water. They're still taking up moisture. As long as they have leaves on them and the temperatures are warm outside, they're still going to be using water.
Okay, right after the break, I want to come back. You said as long as they have leaves on them, that's your shrubs and your trees.
Right.
I want to ask you about that. You said something a while back. I want to challenge you. Well, I say challenge. I want to ask you about. You know, one of the things you said is in case of trees and shrubbery, if they keep their leaves.
Right.
Now, there are times, I'm going to use a perfect example. I've seen trees that the leaves are shriveled, they're brown, but they are staying on the tree. Is that an indication that they're still drawing nutrient from the tree? What is the situation there, and what does that say about the tree?
Okay, well, let me use the example of a young oak tree.
Okay.
Oak trees, deciduous oak trees like red oaks and white oaks that normally would lose their leaves. In the case of the young trees, they maintain or they hold on to those leaves. They don't drop those leaves until springtime. That actually gives them a little bit more winter protection against the cold weather. So they hold on to those leaves to give them a little bit more protection against the cold weather. They're not actually using those leaves. The leaves aren't growing. The water's not going through them. So they're just there. Mostly the function is kind of like the hairs on some leaves that protect the plants from dehydration. Well, holding on to those leaves during the wintertime allows those younger trees to be able to stay a little bit warmer.
Okay, so that's an indication then, quite frankly, of a healthy tree.
Right. Usually a young, healthy tree.
Okay. Only with the young trees? And when by the way, we're talking a young tree. This is a tree that's just recently been planted. A tree that's growing from a seed, different story, or what?
Not necessarily.
Oh,
Usually
really?
younger trees, whether it's a seedling or whether it's a 2 or 3 year old plant that's just been planted, most of these oak trees, and there's a few other species of trees that will do the same thing, they'll turn those leaves brown. They'll hold on to them through the wintertime to give them a little bit of winter protection. But you'll notice as the trees get older, so the older trees that have been there for like 50, 60 years, they're just going to drop all their leaves. They got plenty of protection from those smaller twigs to protect the heart of the tree or the trunk, keep it from freezing. So they got plenty of other ways of protecting with that thicker bark on the trunk.
I'm trying to figure out why I'll say a dead leaf. I guess it's really, is it dead?
Yeah, it's turned brown. It doesn't have any more green to it. You reach up there and grab hold of it. It's going to crinkle just like the leaves on the ground.
Okay. How does that protect the tree?
What it does is it kind of like putting hair on your arms. As the wind blows across that, it's not going to be able to get to your skin as much, so it's going to keep it a little bit warmer.
All right.
And that's pretty much how it does it.
Trapping heat that's rising up out of the ground.
Correct.
Okay. The next question then, if you have a tree, a young tree, that has brown leaves on it, you don't want to go out there and shake those leaves off.
Shaking it's not going to make those leaves come off, or the
Really?
wind would just blow them off. If you were to go in there and grab a hold of them and pull them off, then yeah, they would probably come off. But the wind's going to blow a little bit harder than you're going to be able to shake.
Good
and
point.
so those leaves are going to stay on there until they're ready to drop off.
Okay, then one other aspect about young trees, because again, you've recommended the time to plant a tree is now,
Right.
fall and winter. My question, the tree that you get from the garden center, will they have a brown leaves or will they have green leaves on them most of the time?
Most people get them while they still have green leaves on, but if you were to go right now and get one of those young oak trees it will probably have brown leaves on there, just clinging on there. I would highly recommend not removing those leaves.
Okay, okay. So you're telling me that is not a bad sign. That
No.
it is not a sick tree or a dying tree.
No, it's not a dying tree. It's just that the leaves have dried out. They've upsized. They just haven't fallen off because the young trees hold on to them a little bit longer.
Okay. The other question, of course, has to do with watering young trees now that we're in the winter months. Still water them?
Yes, if we go 2 or 3 weeks without rain, give them some water if you have just planted them, because the plant is still using water.
Okay.
The roots are taking up water. They're using that for root growth. As the wind blows, the tree has on the twigs and the trunks of the tree, they have what's called lenticels. These are gas exchange sites where the water can come out, the air can go in, to help the plant be able to do what it needs to do as far as functioning in those cells that are in the trunk and in the branches. So if those lenticels open, especially during warmer days in the winter, they'll open as the wind blows. It's going to suck a little bit of moisture out of there. Okay. So yes, you will need to irrigate to keep those trees from dehydrating.
All right, I think that's an important story as well. All right, the other issues associated with, I've jumped into a variety of questions. We talked about this last week. You mentioned, I think it was last week, voles and moles.
Correct.
Are you still having calls on those as well?
I am still getting calls on moles. And the
moles
reason,
or voles?
On moles. And the reason
with an M.
With an M. The reason I can tell it's moles is because you've heard that old saying, don't make a mountain out of a molehill.
Right.
Well, a lot of times the people that are calling up they're calling up and they're saying, I have these either moles or voles in my yard, and they're pushing up this soil, making these little mounds. And those little mounds, if they're pushing up soil, making mounds, they're good diggers, and that's going to indicate that it's a mole and not a vole. Moles will do that as they're making their nests, and this is the time right now when they are doing that. They've moved into new areas. They're making their new dens down in the ground, and so they're going to be pushing that soil up.
What is attracting a mole?
Usually they're going to go into an area where they've been able to find a good food source. So that
and their
could
food
be,
source is?
They eat meat. So it's going to be earthworms, mole crickets, grub worms, any kind of insects.
How about roaches?
If the roaches were in the soil, I would say yes, but most of the time the roaches are in the leaf litter, so maybe, but I wouldn't say definitely for sure.
Because are moles blind?
Moles don't see a whole lot. They don't come out of the ground, so they're in the dark. They don't have a real need for eyes. Yeah. But they feel vibrations really well, and that way they can feel the vibration of the insects in the soil, and when they feel that, they can go and find those insects, and that's how they find their food.
Ooh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Kind of like sharks in the water.
Okay.
These are sharks in the soil.
Very interesting. A good comparison. So, all right. We're talking with Sean Banks, of Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency. All right. Other questions you're having?
Well, last week I've had a couple of people call where they've noticed that some of their plants are dying, and I've been out to take a look at a couple of those plants. And there's a couple of things that you can really look for on a plant when you're looking to find out, why is the top of my plant dying? Why is it wilting and just falling apart? In one case, it was more of a tree, about 15-foot tall tree, evergreen. It was a Chamaecyparis, so it was a golden thread moss, but it's a Chamaecyparis. And what had happened is, I think it was right after Florence, they had tied a string on it and pulled it up because it was leaning a little bit. So they tied a string on it and pulled it up. The string eventually rotted and broke, but they forgot to untie it from the trunk of the tree, and it had finally grown into the point where there wasn't enough nutrients going up to the top of the tree, and the top of the tree was dying off. But looking for that on the stem, the pictures they sent me were above where that was in the stem, but when they looked themselves a little bit closer, they could see where that was down in there, a little bit lower down than where they had taken the picture. At this point, they have a couple of options with that. One is that they could cut the plant off at that point and just let it regrow. There was another competing leader that would take over and continue the basic shape of the plant, so it wouldn't look bad. It would still look pretty good. It wouldn't look like you lopped off the top because there was another leader that was already growing right there. or they could leave it there and hope that it was able to grow over where the rope was and heal itself up. I don't know, because it's been so long since that happened.
Right.
It may or may not be able to grow back over and heal itself. And because the top of the tree is already starting to deteriorate to the point where it's probably too late to try to save that part of the tree.
You know, and we're coming to the end here of the program, Coastal Gardener with Sean Banks of Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency. And let me just remind you, there's a cooperative extension agent in every county of North Carolina. You've got situations where people have done this with trees. They've put ropes or some sort of device, cable possibly,
right,
to pull a tree back. If you do that sort of thing to protect the bark, should you use some sort of I don't know, covering over the tree where you're putting the pressure on that line, that rope or whatever?
A lot of people use a piece of garden hose, which is perfectly fine because that softens the blow of the rope, and it
Gotcha.
doesn't. The rope will wiggle through the garden hose, and that means it's not rubbing against the trunk of the tree.
Gotcha.
So that's a good thing. But the one thing that a lot of people forget to do is remove that string after the tree has grown back up, straightened up, whatever, rerooted into the soil, and that's where the problem lies. And it's not every year that I have this, but just about once every 2 or 3 years, I'll get a phone call from somebody, and the top part of their tree's dying, and they're trying to figure this out. And almost every time, it's where they had tied a stake to it and
Right.
pulled it in, and then they had cut the rope, but they had forgot to remove it from the trunk of the tree.
Okay. All right. Anything else as we wrap it up?
I would be very, very cautious about mowing the lawn this time of the year. It's trying to go dormant. Let it go dormant. The plants are going dormant as well, but I would still hold off and probably till December, at least after Thanksgiving or the week of Thanksgiving, before pruning those plants. The tendency is I want to go ahead and do it now while it's warm so that I can get out there and get it done and not have to worry about it. The problem is that while the temperatures are still warm and the tree hasn't gone completely dormant, if you do that pruning, there's a likelihood that the plant starts to grow new growth, and then it gets frost damage to it, and that's an easy way for pathogens to get into the plant.
All right. We're hearing from Sean Banks of Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency. Be nice to your plants. More to come here on the Talk Station. And as always, Sean, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.